I'm Nicola Talent, and you can listen to my brand new podcast, Beast, The Murder of Nora Sheehan, streaming now, wherever you get your podcasts. Eamon, welcome.
Thanks again, Nicola. It's great to be here. I've been counting the days.
Got mail. Just want to show you some smart arse has sent me in. Calculator.
Very good.
Nice one too, isn't it?
So you can go past 10 now.
Desktop electric calculator, right? So that's now going to be here. And it's marked to Nicola and Niall. So he's obviously fallen into the category of, hi, Nicola and Niall, you may have already been sent one, but if not, here's a present. Love the podcast and the show. At least it wasn't a nasty one. Thank you, Orla. Yes. So I don't have a calculator. So we will need it for today because we're talking...
Well, we're back on the
cab.
We're back on the Criminal Assets Bureau, so there's going to be a couple of facts and figures.
Sure.
But I think it's all right because I have them. So I have them pre-calculated.
Yeah, you weren't in remedial maths, obviously, in school, were you? You see, you were doing honours all the way. I'll keep it here in case. Just keep a check on you. Anyway, we're going to talk about the Waldrons, the brothers Christopher Git Waldron and David Waldron. Maybe start with who they are and their connections, I think.
Yeah, they're I suppose Finglas is where they're from, and they would have been part of that generation, that would have included Marlow Hyland, who's the major gang leader who was shot dead in 2006. They would have kind of, I suppose, been much younger men at that stage. Eamon Dunn then, who filled that slot, would have been an associate of theirs, along with Alan, the two Bradley brothers, Fat Puss and Alan. And they very much seem to, after Eamon the Don Dunne's murder in 2010, they were pretty much suspected of kind of moving into that turf and taking over and making plenty of money from drugs. Now, a lot of this is alleged in what the Criminal Assets Bureau have been saying. They've gone after various properties for
two separate cases against them.
Two separate cases against them, and David's wife, Charlene, also added herself to the case in that she was claiming one of the houses, that she was part owner of one of the houses that was targeted by CAB, which we'll get to. I think you had a particular interest in it, I see, from looking back through the records.
Really nice
over the last couple of years in a nice bit of the countryside.
If CAB are selling it, I might even just throw my...
You've always wanted the man den that's in there as well.
I just like the whole idea of having a pad down the country somewhere and surrounded with, there was a sort of an outdoor arena for horses and stuff. I could get back into my show jumping.
Your equestrian
briefly when
sports, I was
afraid then I was going to fall. But before we just move on to them, dipping back briefly to Marlow Hyland and co. So that turf originated under the control of PJ Judge, known as the Psycho, who was murdered himself, suspected to be murdered by Marlow Hyland, who took over his turf. And subsequently, Hyland built up a huge gang out there. He became public enemy number one and the top target of the guards because they didn't realise, I think for a while, I think they started a thing called Operation Oak, which was to target all the drug gangs in Dublin. Then when they realised how big Marlow's operation had got, they separated it into another operation just to target him. And they had huge success. They seized loads of weapons, loads of drugs. There was something like 22 seizures, which created a massive paranoia within the grouping and within Marlow's own world. And I think that's really what ended up causing this next schism, which was when Eamon The Don Dunne did exactly what Marlow had done before him. He took out the boss to take over.
Yeah, he was apparently the getaway driver on the evening that he was killed, along with a completely innocent young plumber's apprentice,
Anthony Campbell,
which is still an unsolved and very shocking murder. I know there's I think there's been a chief suspect named in the past who's serving a long sentence or I think he might have recently just finished that for other reasons. But yeah, and it's one of those cases where you always bring up when people say, come up with this idea, let the gangsters kill each other. You'll say, well, you actually can't afford to do that because things like this happen, And
I think it was near to Christmas. He was staying in a house in Scribblestown Park in Finglas, Marlow. He was moving around a lot because he felt under threat from a lot of things, his own and also the Gardaí. And he was staying in the house. He had slept on in the morning and the plumber arrived. He was an apprentice. His boss had gone to collect some supplies. And this gunman burst in basically and shot Anthony Campbell on the way out. always believed, because he didn't ever want him to be able to identify him. So he just took his life. And that was raised in the Dáil by the then Justice Minister, Michael McDowell. It caused an outcry. It was one of those murders that really the nation buckled and realised this gangland threat isn't just, something that just affects the underworld, that it does spill into civilised society. But nonetheless, on it went, and Eamon The Don Dunne himself became a huge threat to the security of the state, and was murdered on the orders of the Kinahans, I think. And
his own reign at the top of that gang was probably one of the most vicious and blood-soaked of any gang leader, considering that he wasn't necessarily involved in a feud like the McCarthy Dundons or Fat Freddy and Radigan in Crumlin Trimna. And there's something like 15 murders are attributed to Dunne, and at least 2 of them were double murders, which, were quite shocking. And
he just sort of turned on people, did he?
It was anyone who was even basically a possible threat. And certainly, I think the first kind of high-profile one was John Daly, who would have been a very loyal member of Marla Highland's gang. And if you remember, he kind of hit the headlines with his phone call from his jail cell in Portlaoise Prison in high security at the time. And when he came out, then he was throwing his weight around, having been promised money on his return from being on holidays in prison. When that wasn't forthcoming, then, he was getting more irate. And he was shot dead, and it was very much a message that the Don was putting down at the time. And it went on. There was other people. There was other people killed just on the basis that they might kill him. I mean, we know Git Gilroy went missing because there was fears that he would actually spill the beans on having carried out a double murder for the Don. So I mean, he was particularly nasty, vicious piece of work, and as we know, I mean, well, not as we know, but as we suspect, when he was shot dead then in 2010, Eamon Dunne was, we think, the target of a wide, disparate group of criminals who just wanted to see the back of him at this stage, and it was okayed by the Kinahans, who had really
chaotic, really.
It was bad for business to be shooting people like that. That no one could, if your best workers from the Kinahans' point of view are spending their time looking over their shoulder, worried about being shot by one of their peers, it's not good for business. You want those guys to be concentrating on selling the product and getting the money laundered and moved on, and and getting the business running. So
and you see, that's an incredible, like, when you think back, that's the way the Kinahans approached that, totally businesslike. I mean, they themselves ended up getting lured into a personalised feud then, which was incredibly bad for their business.
Well, in a way, yeah. I suppose the reason there, you could argue, was that was a civil war. I mean, like Git Gilroy would have been, I think, pals. He was sent by the Don, over to Spain. I think they even put him in through a drug rehab clinic at the time. And it was Gary Hutch was his pal at the time. And Eamon The Don Dunne again wasn't he great pals with Paddy Doyle, who was murdered in Spain as well? Another, kind of would have been part and parcel of the Kinahan setup. So. Yeah, I mean, look, the Kinahans, supposedly put the pressure on to keep the lid on things in the Limerick feud as well. I mean, it's a pretty smart business move, really, when you consider it from that point of view. But
they merged very quickly as well during all those years. If you think about that, those names you've mentioned, each of those names, Paddy Doyle, Gary Hutch, and obviously Eamon The Don Dunne, Git Gilroy, were all suspected of being murdered under the Kinahans' orders.
Yeah, and that's and as time goes on, it does look like that, suspicion is corrected. That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, you can never be 100%.
Along with many others that, Gerard Hatchett Kavanagh. I always wonder why with him, what was the reasoning? Because I think it is pretty much universally accepted that he was an in-house killing. He was murdered under the orders of the Kinahans. Was there a jealousy there? What, did he pocket money, or did Daniel Kinahan just simply not like him?
And again, there's often, a fear or paranoid fear of blowback. You train someone up, or you make someone powerful within your own organization because they're the person you rely on to carry out, these drastic deeds of killing somebody or doing whatever, torturing people. And then you realize they're also got the evidence is all in their head, and they're the people who could put you away. It was certainly something that motivated Eamon Dunne. I'm sure it motivated Daniel Kinahan on occasion.
Yeah.
That you can't afford to have loose tongues or, potential loose tongues. And I think when, certainly with the Don, he was using so much drugs, I think it was in one of the pieces that I was reading today, they were talking about 5 grams a day. So you're not really going to be in a straight form of mind for working out who's your enemy if you're using that much of cocaine at the time, Plus if you're constantly on the move.
And within all that world, that chaos that exists and that paranoia and double cross and everything, the Waldron brothers have not only survived, but they have gone on to, according to the Criminal Assets Bureau, feather their nests quite nicely from their careers in organised crime. Now, 2 separate cases, and one has been settled. The other will go to a full hearing.
It's 2 separate cases. And what happened this week was Christopher Git Waldron's, it was settled. Now, that involved 2 houses and 3 designer watches. Now, the designer watches, I think previously there'd been a receiver appointed to them. So that was pretty much kind of a tap in for the Criminal Assets Bureau to get that. They were very, very nice ones. I took a note. So you have a Breitling Super Avenger, a Rolex Datejust with diamonds, and a Cartier Santos automatic. And between them, I think they were worth... one of them was definitely worth 17,000, and it was a much higher figure. I think it might have been as much as 80,000. I think was one of the figures that
watch
I heard in court, but I can't quite remember if that's right. But between the 3 of them, that's how much they were looking at. So because so Christopher's case didn't go to a full hearing. It was settled, which meant that I suppose none of the affidavits were open, so we won't necessarily see some of the more interesting stuff that we might otherwise. His house in Cabra, which is the one he put a substantial amount in to renovate, so basically agreed to give that up, but he gets to hang on to a separate property then in I think it's where is it, Mellows Avenue, Mellows Road in Finglas. So he gets to keep that.
Would that be an original family home, or was it?
I'm not sure, but that was basically returned to him. So, and that's so the one in Cabra is where, if you remember, one of our colleagues got the picture of him shirtless.
Yes,
with his fine manly build.
Is that on the Killala Road?
That's the Killala Road. That
is the family home. We've described it as before. So the Mellows Road property must have been an investment property he purchased. And of course, just to explain to people, so the Criminal Assets Bureau go after people like in civil proceedings. So always in civil proceedings, there's value to settling rather than to going ahead to full hearings. Probably value for both sides. And in a way, both sides nearly always have to walk away with it, seemingly with a bit of a win. So he's come to the table. They've got the watches, they've got one of the houses, but he's been left with one house. Yeah,
and he's been left. So it wasn't a complete wipeout from his point of view. And I suppose the fact it had been going on for more than 3 years meant for the Criminal Assets Bureau they could wrap this one up. It's been fairly slow. I think there might have been even last week. I think there might even have been attempts to again make a switch of lawyers, which was refused by the judge. So that was. So the kind of the previously made agreement just was done and dusted. But look, I mean, it's dragged through. I mean, we've seen it probably even more clearly because there's been more hearings in regards to his brother David and his wife Charlene, and that has just it's dragged on, and there's been kind of free legal aid applications which were then appealed by the Criminal Assets Bureau. And then new evidence was unearthed, so the Court of Appeal returned it back to the Criminal Assets Bureau. So again, and there was adjournment sought a lot of the time. So I mean, it's just been a long struggle. Now there was actually a 2-day hearing, but unfortunately both of us are on holiday.
Right, so, okay, for the David Waldron case.
So the David Waldron case has also been fully heard now at this stage. So, but the judgment has not been published.
And the affidavits have been opened to the court, so we will be able to apply for them.
Yeah, and there'll be a full written judgment. So we'll get a lot more information when the judge hands down, or publishes that. And that could be any time soon. It could be tomorrow, or it might be sometime in 6 months' time.
So where did it all start for the Waldrons in regard their battle with the Criminal Assets Bureau? We know they have long, going way back, connections with organised crime, with the Marlow Highland, etc. They have sort of been seen as being the ones who took over Eamon The Don Dunne's patch. Maybe not in quite such an aggressive, murderous fashion as he ran it, but they have sort of been they're believed to have taken over that part of Dublin.
Yeah,
but
it's possible they were quite, they were probably the last best competent people to take over the gang at that stage. I mean, they were actually involved they were directors, I think, of a motor business back at that time.
That's going to happen to us, by the way, in the media business when people keep leaving. We'll eventually be
the only people left
to run the whole show.
Now at 109.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's Nicola. But so they were linked to a motor business that a fellow called Richard Keogh was shot dead in Spain in 2009. So they were linked to him. So they obviously had a bit of get up and go and a bit of ability about them, despite their, troublesome, list of criminal convictions, which included a pretty nasty assault in 2013. For which they got a sentence, but that will probably come up. So, I mean, they would have been, I suppose, the first time then we would have heard about them was in 2017. There was a series of cab raids, 24 premises were raided. There was a lot of stuff seized. And the first kind of major piece that appeared in the media at the time with the headline Brothers of Bling was a piece that you wrote at that time. And that was really the first time that there's anything, of note that kind of puts them in that frame, that they're at that level of criminality. I mean, before that, they would have been described as associates of Eamon Dunne in relation to the assault case, for which they both got 2 years, which is pretty nasty. There was a guy, I think he was connected to, a murdered drug dealer who called to their house and made threats, and he went to a pub in Cabra, not too far away, and while he was there, the two Waldrons came in and their great friend Mark Bucko Buckley and another man, and they used a wheel brace, a handsaw. I think a bar stool was broken over the guy. He was seriously injured, and it was all caught on CCTV. And this was used in evidence against him because the victim of the assaults never made a statement and didn't cooperate with the guards. So. That was really, that's the first time we heard of him. And while he was in jail, this is when the famous Darview, the lovely country residence that you now have your eye on, that's when that got built.
When is it going up for sale? Well, whenever this case is finished.
We might find out.
Yes. I have a note that David Waldron first fortified his home on the Ratoath Road. That's obviously his family home. And then he built this stunning mansion in the Wexford countryside while he was in jail. I think the planning permission, possibly for that assault, that the planning permission was granted around March 2015. So he probably was serving a sentence at that point. And the building cost they estimated on this house was 1.2 million. Do you want to describe it?
I couldn't really. Well, these are your words, though, if I just start describing it, because you really should have been working for an estate agent, I think, at the time, Nicola. It was pretty.
I actually doorstepped the architect. That's the truth.
I'd say he was very happy with your description of the...
Well, he was like amongst the 24 homes and businesses searched as part of this sort of cab case into the two brothers were an architect's firm, accountant's firm. So it was always those sort of legitimate businesses that didn't know what they were involved in, but they often find themselves, solicitors' offices as well, find themselves caught up in these cab raids. And yes, this gentleman, I did ask him about it, but anyway...
Okay, this is quoting now from you.
Yes.
I couldn't possibly be as florid and as descriptive as you were in your writing style. But look, it's a lovely stone-clad 2-story house. It's kind of, sunken into the hill slightly. It's surrounded by, a stone-clad wall as well, or probably a stone wall, not just clad. You described it as, pretty much like a luxury hotel. It's 3,000 square feet, comes with ensuite bedrooms, double doors opening out onto viewing platforms. And Waldron designed his very own man den in his country hideaway. And they also discovered it was fitted out with a bar, a pool table, and a specially framed poster of The Godfather. You
see, there you go. These guys always think that they're in the movies. I mean, the movies are made to reflect them, and then they reflect the people in the movies. So ironic.
Yeah, I think there's well, you can argue, though, I suppose the movie's originally based on someone else, but those guys probably were...
They just want to be in the movies.
Looking at the old Hollywood street crawlers, taking pictures of the guys getting locked up, and the famous line where some mafioso is trying to hide his face with his hat, and he said, who's going to make you famous? And so he removed his hat for a second just to let the photographer get a picture, and then put it back over his face again. So I think there is a certain element of people looking for notoriety. One way or another, but it looks like it's.
So we went down there, myself and Ernie, to have a look at that house. I mean, this was during these raids that it sort of became evident that the Waldrons were not just known associates, but they were serious players who had, literally gathered this portfolio of properties. And this house in a place called Larraheen outside Gordy was basically the jewel in the crown. It was beautiful. I mean, as you were looking at it, it was all fenced off around it and everything. But to the right of it was this like outdoor arena, show jumping arena. And there was a place for stables. And it was in a kind of a valley. I'd never be able to take you there because Ernie drove, unfortunately. If I drive, I can always bring you back to the place without a sat nav.
A homing pigeon.
If I'm not driving, I haven't a hope. I don't know what county I'm in. But anyway, there was a lot of winding roads. It was very much in a rural little area, but gorgeous, beautiful house. And I don't think they used it. Well, maybe they did. We went back a few times and it seemed to have been like as soon as it was exposed after the cab raids, it kind of would just lay there, I think, as they're fighting these guys. A lot of these guys are fighting cab out of pride in a way.
Yeah, I think so. Until they realised that they might have to actually pay the legal fees, which is why, it's been so slow in this case that they've fought to try and get, free legal aid, which you don't automatically get in a civil case whereas you do if you can, depending on your income. And look, nearly everyone gets free legal aid if it's a serious enough charge in Ireland, which is a good thing, I think. But look, these guys can, they're trying to look for it. In the end, he did get it. He was given a kind of free legal aid. And the Criminal Assets Bureau appealed it, but more evidence then came forward, and it went back, and the judge basically then allowed for €8,000 to be, used for a forensic accountant to kind of challenge some of the affidavits from the cab side, who were able to show X amount of money was used in different transfers. Because this house that we're talking about, Darview, it wasn't in his name. And there was 4 kind of major payments made, none of them through him.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of work and a lot of forensic accountancy work to be able to tie back all the payments. I have a note here that they went as far back as 1980 looking at finances. So this would have been family members who would have claimed to have had money for various reasons. So this is how far they went back.
It just shows that with the length of those investigations, doesn't it?
Yeah, and you're talking about €3 million, almost €3 million worth of unexplained cash, because you also had, like Cabra talking about, there was a house in Leixlip which had €315,000 worth of refurbishments done. And then another house in Cabra with 633,000, for refurbishments. You could build, 2 new houses for that. Yeah. So it just shows you the level of, you've brought this up before, is that the thinking was with these guys that if we put it into refurbishment of properties, then the cab won't be able to get hold of it because it's in a family home.
Exactly.
But they're saying that
they've pulled the plug on that really with them, because I think there was so much of it. I think in court, the Criminal Assets Bureau said Waldron had claimed that he got the money to buy this first house he bought in 2001 in Glenties Park in Finglas, and he got that through dole money. And he was also supposed to be working as a plasterer and a security guard, and they went back there to see if he could show the earnings and to prove that basically you couldn't save while on the dole. The purpose of the dole is not that you can save to buy a house. It's really just to keep somebody in food and heat and a roof over their head while they're waiting to get a job.
It's pretty obvious. It's something that actually came up in one, I think it was the court hearing in June 2020. And like Cab was saying, that he was claiming that he worked for his father, and they said, look, there's no evidence to support this. And they were saying if his claims that this €18,000 from his dole money was used to buy the house, then it should be easy proof, and it should be easy proof. And they couldn't. Cab went looking for it because they're not going to waste their time on a case where they're, where they can be quickly, outwitted, so to speak, by the opposition. So they're not going to waste their time. So they do dot their I's and cross their T's in that regard before they bring it, to a high court. The likes of Judge Jones, has a kind of a reputation as being, unlike yourself, has a very good reputation for the maths and the figures. And and he often says the best evidence is in the figures.
I would agree with him.
And he can't and so you can't really sort of say, well, I don't know how I got, or you can't leave it vague as to where substantial sums of cash. And you're not talking about 80 quid going missing from a till. You're talking about 3 million quid. Yeah. And if the guards are saying like we have intelligence to say that these guys, they were known as associates of, major drug dealers. We believe that they've taken over the business and this is what they're doing and this is how they're making money. And, a guy who's supposedly on the dole or working as a plasterer is suddenly spending 3 million. Sorry, and I said it was 4 different people. It was actually 6 different cash payments. So it's a really complex case. And one, I think that's consistently testing both the legislation and I suppose the skills of the Criminal Assets Bureau and how good their people are. And like it's not cheap, to if they're hiring in forensic accountants. I know they have some on board, but I'm sure they have to bring in people as well.
But they put their all into every case, and I think that's what often when you talk to them, Mick Gubbins is the chief there, and previous chiefs before him have always said it's actually not about. While it's all about the mathematics and the figures, it's actually more than that. They're not actually looking to make money, CAB, even though they do make money for the Exchequer. It's about denying these proceeds of crime to people involved in criminality. It's about the optics of that within a community when you have the likes of the Waldrons lording it over everybody else. They've better everything. They have this, that and the other. And denying them that is giving a message, really.
And I think they've done that very well, even at a smaller level where you have people that they've targeted for the likes of 100,000 and 200,000 because that's possibly all they can easily get.
Yeah.
And they'll take a house off them in, whether it's Dundalk or Kilrush or Limerick or somewhere. And it's about sending a message to the people in the neighbourhood. You keep talking to us. And, if they turn up in a Mercedes G-Wagon or something worth 200 grand, tell us and we'll take it off them. Yeah. And I think that's important because if people see, if people see, criminal gangs and, the major players within them, being able to enjoy their ill-gotten gains and stay rooted in their community, it's wrong. It's corruptive. It's corrosive and,
yes.
And corrupting to have people like that. I mean, like, we've seen it in the past where some of these guys end up sponsoring local football teams, like, or they'll turn up to her making charity donations, really trying to play the Al Capone that, or the Robin Hood that we're the good guys. And, and it's not quite as far as the provisional IRA were, but it's almost like kind of setting up an alternative state in places where there's a certain level of distrust and also, I suppose, financial deprivation in an area that these guys can quickly fill they can fill a vacuum that's been left there by the state if that happens. So I think it's important to let people know that they're not the biggest dog on the block.
Now in 2020, the case was first brought to the courts, the Criminal Assets Bureau case. They had 3 years at that point been kind of basically poring over the documents that would have been seized during those raids and also anything else they could get their hands on. It was at that point that David Waldron asked for the free legal aid. Judge Alex Owen moved quickly to hear the case and he got the legal aid. Charlene Waldron, David's wife, came on as somebody with a beneficial interest in the house. And there it trucked along. But in 2021, in a separate part of the forest, there was a organised crime raid on a premises and there was cash of €1 million found in it and it was concealed in vehicles. Now that at the time was understood to be Waldron related, or certainly that their associates in the gang. It was believed to be their cash. So they've been hit at a couple of angles here now. You have the civil proceedings going on about their assets, but you also have them as targets of the Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau. And it was 2022 that David Waldron got the 8K to pay a forensic accountant to go through his bank accounts, the house purchases and his lifestyle. But at the same time, the couple were claiming that they couldn't afford solicitors' fees or whatever else. They were found to have hosted a christening party.
Yeah. This is the new evidence, basically, that came up that saw the Court of Appeal send the case back to the High Court, back to the proceeds of crime list. And so that, so it was back in front of the judge. And again, he had to rehear whether or not he should give them free legal aid. So, CAB were pretty much fighting this. So, so there was, they kind of said basically that they had a christening party at a hotel where the venue was paid $5,000 in cash. And Counsel for CAB at the time was saying there would have been other expenses, now which they didn't have proof of. Right. But they said there must have been other expenses for the party at which 2 bands and a DJ played for 100 guests. So
That's some christening.
And it was quite the christening, yeah. So, I mean, they described it as the couple were playing cat and mouse with the court, saying that their affidavits that were sent in reply don't explain their wealth, but are just bold assertions, as they put it. They were just saying, look, this is how we made it. But there was no paperwork to back it up, which is always going to catch you out, in these things. I mean, they also said they bought a Land Rover in March 2020 for 23 grand. It was paid for by 5 grand in cash, 4,500 from a credit union loan, and the rest was financed. They said that while the couple had declared they only had one pony in their statement of assets and income, CAM found that there were other ponies they owned. And they also found that David Waldron was car dealing at the time as well.
And claiming pandemic unemployment.
And claiming pandemic unemployment they weren't entitled to, apparently.
They could actually teach you how to live, these people.
But the important part was, though, like they also denied that, it was all him doing the car dealing, and that one of them was actually his I think it was 6 or 7 year old son who was just started. It was his car that was sold, so it wasn't actually his money.
Okay, I've heard it all.
So, I mean, so CAB were trying to say, look, that even since kind of the original hearing about free legal aid in 2019, they're saying, well, there's obviously been evidence. In their case, they were saying all this evidence was pointing to the fact that they were able to generate a serious amount of cash, and was suggesting that the court had been misled. That's what the counsel for CAB were saying. And so in this case then, the judge agreed then he would give a certain amount of free legal aid, but it was specifically for a forensic accountant so that they could do an answer to the CAB's version of it. And it wasn't what they were looking for. And he brought it down to 8 grand, which he always does on how long it takes him to.
And he's very fair, that judge, I think, and he's very thorough, as we've spoken about him before. He always makes sure that nothing will come back on him. Do you know what I mean? He doesn't do anything in anger, or, he's very...
Yeah, he'd be very even, and I think it came up, and there was another, I can't remember which case it was now, but there was, I think it's one involving a Longford family, including something like 8 respondents in that, and they were looking for, I think each of them were looking for forensic accountants and a valuer to, and they couldn't get anyone in Ireland, so they're going to have to fly people from England, and it was going to cost 140,000, and the judge, he said he wasn't having it, and the forensic accountant was saying, well, there's 111 pages in this file, and I figure it's going to take me X amount of hours, and therefore I want 70. And the judge said, well, it took me 9 hours to do the whole lot, so you're getting 9 hours, and the going rate is whatever it was.
And he did that.
And he would have done it, absolutely, yeah. I mean, he's not going to lie in his own court, is he, for a start?
No, he's not, but that is, and I can just imagine him doing that, because he is that forensic himself, isn't he?
Yeah, so I mean, they basically got 9 hours, and he says the same for all of you, so you're all getting the same thing.
You wouldn't go into that court and try to pull the wool over his eyes.
I don't think so. And I mean, I think there's, it is public money, and he's not going to throw it about, and it's something that he's kind of, the judge says, quote, he has to be careful with public money. But he will listen to arguments.
Yeah.
But I mean, and arguments have to be backed up, they have to be on affidavit and then presented in court by counsel or by the respondents themselves. But he will listen to it, but you're going to have to be spot on, I think.
There was one other little interesting factor in this that I just thought would be worth mentioning. Christopher Git Waldron, who has settled his case, was rumoured to have bought suits for a number of the mourners, and he carried the coffin at the funeral of James Whelan, who was the young gun victim involved in the feud with the Flashy gang. Now, they were at one point one gang, and they split. And Whelan basically sort of led one mob on one side and Flashy on the other in a bid to kind of for that drug turf. But they're young, they're very chaotic. There's a lot of incidents still going on out in the Finglas area. There's basically been female relatives' houses being targeted. There's all this sort of stuff. I would say similar kind of trajectory that Drogheda was on before the feud got very, very dangerous. That sort of tit for tat stuff, street fighting, etc. Whelan was shot dead on April the 3rd suspected by members of the Flashy gang, and 29 previous convictions himself. The funeral, I think, was filmed, was put all over social media. It was a sort of a culturally one of those Instagram gangster type funerals. But it interests me that when you look at what happened in Drogheda, and I'm not suggesting that exactly this is Waldron. But when you see older criminals involved with younger ones, like in Drogheda, there was older criminals there that were kind of directing what happened on the ground. You know, they were directing these younger guys and what to do, you know, go out and fight him. And the thing built until it culminated in the murder of Cian Mulready Woods, his dismemberment, and his body parts been left all over the country, or over the city, which was absolutely abhorrent, and was so abhorrent it was a news story from Australia to the States to everywhere. It wasn't just us that were shocked by it. But yeah, that idea that those sort of veterans, those older ones who've been through it, who've survived, who've come out cleverer, brighter, that they're sort of there as these mentors for the youngers.
Yeah, and don't forget, I suppose, the likes of Mr. Flashy would be, third generation on from Marlow Highland. So,
yeah,
you know, Git Waldron is somewhere in between. So you don't really know the relationships. And it could be, you know, whether it's family relationships or you know, friendship relationships, they wouldn't necessarily be clear to even people on the ground, even people themselves involved. And it was surprising because people had wondered why none of the more senior criminals from Finglas were getting involved. I mean, if you consider that Mr. Flashy, I suppose it was Trevor Byrne had been kind of the leader of that gang before his, you know, various troubles ended up behind prison as well. And there was a kind of like, you know, how come none of these guys are getting obviously involved? And the story was that they were genuinely kind of taking an arm's length, you know, kind of approach to it. But because I suppose these younger fellas were just, you know, a bit too wild for their liking. So if you consider that, you know, we've been talking about the Waldrons as possibly, you know, that they ended up in the right place at the right time and were the most competent. You wonder, was that a good move, or was it a message at the time for him to take such a prominent role in the funeral? Like, he carried the coffin out. He was right in front. I mean, big picture on the Sunday World, you know, I mean, and he, you know, it was reported he paid for the suits for a number of people. They wore the black suits, you know, the mourner suits and all the rest. Which is very much, I suppose, it's always a way of making a statement, as the Kinahans famously did.
Absolutely. And there is a kind of bigger picture in it. You see it sometimes with maybe the way organised crime would support the far right, because when somebody else is sucking all the resources of the state, as in these younger criminals with their tit for tat, you know, firebombs and whatever else, their eye is taken off them. And it's probably a clever business way. If you support the youngsters causing trouble, it's probably quite a clever way to protect your own business and to sort of make sure that, you know, there isn't a load of resources being pumped in on top of you.
Well, I suppose, yeah, you can argue it's a possible. I'm not sure if that would work. You know, I do think it would bring in more heat in the long run. It would certainly, you'd have presumably surveillance then in areas where you mightn't expect because of stuff like this going on. I mean, it can't be good for business to have, you know, arson attacks going on, but, you know, sometimes it might be more trouble than it's worth to stop it. You know, if they're thinking, look, if they're just fighting among themselves, let them at it. You know, as some people say about, you know, criminals fighting among themselves in general, like some of these guys might be quite happy to let the young fellas slug it out and burn each other's houses down, so long as they don't affect business, you know. And
the effects of losing those properties. And I mean, you know, you can look on some of those properties and maybe those watches as being a drop in the ocean in a bigger budget of, you know, what you'd be making out of cocaine or whatever drug it is you're dealing. But actually I always find with them, they hate losing anything to the state. They're sort of anti-state anyway. And it stays so raw with them for so long. It does have a huge effect, no matter the value of the items.
And some of these guys are absolute penny pinchers as well. Like, they hate, like, you know, handing out cash, you know, and they'll try and coerce somebody into doing something rather than pay them. I think there is exceptions to that. There was somebody who was quite generous, used to give 500 quid for burning out cars and stuff like that. So he never had any trouble getting people to do his dirty work.
Who was that?
I'm trying to think of it now. I can't remember. But that was, you know, I mean, so people have different approaches to it.
Yeah.
But generally they're pretty tight and pretty mean with their money. And
they don't like the cab.
And there's a loss of face as well. Yeah. Because, and like cab, to some extent, are rubbing their noses in it. I know, well, officially they're not. But, you know, effectively that's what's happening, you know, when it is widely reported, not just in the Sunday World, but like, you know, since we started covering the cab, I mean, the Irish Times are there now, and, you know, and other news organizations have started turning up at the cab hearings again. which is great, I think. And, it's kind of getting the message out there, and they're not going to like it.
Well, I always reckoned that the Criminal Assets Bureau was like getting a job in the National Lottery. You were always coming to the media with good news, weren't you? You really were. You were always coming with some kind of piece of good news. It's never really like, Cab doing dreadful job.
It's a winner.
It's a winner.
We have another winner.
Yeah. The Lotto PR job had to have been one of the best ever in the country, I always thought.
Thought of that.
Yeah.
That might be my next place I'll send my CV.
Oh, definitely. If we don't get the top jobs here, which of course we will.
I think we've been ruled out by now, Nicola.
You never know. Anyway, I have my calculator now, so I'll be able to work out my pay increase.
Great.
Yeah. Okay, Eamon, thank you very much.
Always a pleasure, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.